हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय चैनल। आज हम करेंगे MEG1 ब्लॉक 6 और इसका है यूनिट 27, इंट्रोडक्शन ऑफ रोमांटिक पोइट्री। इसमें हम विलियम वर्ड्स आज पढ़ रहे हैं। उनका लाइफ स्पैन जो है वो 1770 से लेके 1850 तक है। तो लेट अस स्टार्ट नाउ। Wordsworth is a prominent reader of the Romantic movement in England. He supported the French Revolution in its early phase, but his liberalism gradually dwindled. In 1795, he met St. Coleridge, and this meeting was beneficial to both of them. They jointly authored lyrical ballads, जो कि 1798 में पब्लिश हुआ था, which was considered to be the beginning of the Romantic movement in England. On the urging of Coleridge, Wordsworth explained the guiding principles of this new movement in his preface to the second edition of the book, published in 1880. तो न्यू मूवमेंट क्या थी? रोमांटिक मूवमेंट की बात कर रहे हैं। In addition to many lyrics, Wordsworth wrote the Prelude in 1850, a sort of spiritual and autobiography, as its subtitle, The Growth of a Poet's Mind, indicates. As the title suggests, the Prelude is the first of a three-part poem, The Recluse. The second part, entitled The Excursion, was published in 1849, but the third part was never written. तो इसके तीन पार्ट्स थे। पहला जो था वो क्या था? एक्चुअली द प्रिल्यूड जो है वो बुक, ये पोइट्री का नाम था, पोइट्री की बुक का नाम था जो उन्होंने लिखी थी। उसके तीन पार्ट्स थे। तो जो पहला पार्ट था वो रेक्ल्यूज था, सेकंड पार्ट जो था वो एक्सकर्जन था, और जो पब्लिश हुआ था 1814 में, और जो थर्ड पार्ट था ना वो कभी लिखा ही नहीं गया। तो Wordsworth is better known for his short poems like Tintern Abbey and Immortality Ode than for his long, ambitious works. Tintern Abbey recounts three stages in the development of the poet's love of nature: sensuous animal passion, moral influence, and third is mystical communion. माइकल भी उनकी एक पोइट्री की कलेक्शन थी। माइकल deals with the sturdiness of character and nature's healing power. The 5 Lucy poems are also popular. In Ode on Intimations of Immortality, Wordsworth attributes a child's wisdom and glory to the unconscious memory of a previous life. Resolution and Independence is yet another memorable poem. Wordsworth influenced modern thinking on the natural goodness of childhood, the moral value of simple living, and the inspiring and healing powers of nature. Wordsworth seems to have attempted to translate into action, both in his life and in his work, the principle simple living and high thinking. Okay, now Wordsworth की theory of poetry हम पढ़ेंगे. Wordsworth observations prefixed to lyrical ballads, generally called preface to the second edition of 1800, जो हमने पहले भी पढ़ा है ना, पहले पैराग्राफ में कि 1800 में जो सेकंड एडिशन शुरू हुआ था उसके प्रीफेस में उन्होंने थ्योरी के बारे में लिखा था, थ्योरी ऑफ पोइट्री के बारे में लिखा था। तो फिर से पढ़ती हूँ। वर्ड्सवर्थ ऑब्जर्वेशंस प्रीफिक्स्ड टू lyrical ballads, generally called preface to the second edition of 1800, as his manifesto, in which he discusses a number of issues related to the art of poetry. These issues include the nature of poetry, the creation of poetry, the impact of the poem on the reader, and the difference between language of prose and the language of poetry. इसी चीज़ पे बहुत कॉन्फ्लिक्ट था इनका, कॉलरिज का और वर्ड्सवर्थ का. The poet's view on these important topics are scattered throughout the preface, and we have to piece together what he has said on each question. First, the question of the subject matter. The incidents and situations from common life are chosen. Wordsworth thought that rustic and humble life is better suited for the essential passions of the heart. He believed that the emotions of the rural people are simpler, purer, and perhaps better than those of the city dweller. He also thought that the people living in the midst of nature have a better moral attitude and they become part of the sense of the divinity present in nature. The second innovation is the use of a selection of language really used by men. Wordsworth attacked the so called poetic diction of an earlier generation. Poetic diction is a painstaking invention and hence far removed from the living speech of the ordinary people. The common speech or a selection of it, Wordsworth felt, is more appropriate to describe the incidents and situations for common life. Throughout the preface, Wordsworth repeatedly states that simple and unelaborated expressions as his choice. तो वो बोलते हैं quote, my purpose was to imitate and as far as possible to adopt the very language of men, and such personifications of abstract ideas do not make any natural or regular part of that language, unquote. Wordsworth finds a moral justification for poetry. The aim of the poet, in his view, is to correct man's feeling, to give these feelings more consonant with eternal nature. A poet provides us with spiritual exercises in order to give us new feelings and make our feelings more sane and pure. Now, ओके उनकी जो पोइट्री है वो साइकोलॉजिकल अप्रोच है उसमें. Wordsworth discussed the difference between the language of the poetry and the language of the prose. He says, it may be safely affirmed that there neither is nor can be any essential difference between the language of prose and metrical composition. There is a major point of disagreement between Wordsworth and Coleridge. Similarly, Wordsworth's views on meter are questioned by Coleridge. According to Wordsworth, meter is a kind of restraining influence. By its regularity, meter holds passion in check. Also, meter seems to give poetry a kind of unreality. The end of poetry, quote, the end of poetry is to produce excitement in coexistence with an overbalance of pleasure. Now the co-presence of something regular cannot but have great efficacy in tempering and restraining the passion by an intertexture of ordinary feeling and of feeling not strictly and necessarily connected with the passion. Unquote. The romantics give a high place to the poet. They endow him with the ability to speak to other men. So Wordsworth asserts, quote, he means the poet is a man speaking to men, a man, it is true, endowed with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness, who has a greater knowledge of human nature and a comprehensive soul that are supposed to be common among mankind. Unquote. A poet is related to other men who have the same ingredients, but the poet has them in great measure. Thus, the preface discusses a wide range of topics concerning poetry and the innovations that lyrical ballads has introduced. Now, Wordsworth's practice of this theory, ये topic है. For all his commitment to the language really used by men, Wordsworth could not help using archaism. Archaism means old language. Archaism, words of Latin origin and inversion of normal word order in several of his well-known poems, including Immortality Ode and the Prelude. For instance, in Immortality Ode, he used apparelled and celestial. In the Prelude, he used recreant and inscrutable, discordant, which are polysyllabic words derived from Latin. Then there are archaisms like short means shoe, dined means desired, Springles means traps. There are also inversions of word order in plurals like by the vision splendid, for the sake of rhythm, for the sake of rhyme. In resolution and independence, we have a quote: himself he propped, limbs, body, and pale face, motionless as a cloud that old man stood. Unquote. Wordsworth must have realized that the demands of his poetic art are more important than a rigid adherence to his theory, as said in the preface to Lyrical Ballads. Now, Wordsworth partnership with the Coleridge. Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge met in 1795. Coleridge spotted talent in Wordsworth and praised him as the best poet of the age. The two friends met almost daily, discussed poetry, and composed large quantities of poetry. Their association was so close that same phrases occur in the poems of both. They collaborated in some poems. They exchanged thoughts and lines of poetry. Coleridge helped Wordsworth in completing the latter's unfinished poems. Lyrical Ballads was the fruit of this extraordinary partnership. The famous preface of 1800 was also a result of consultation between the two poets. Of the two sorts of poetry based on the theme, Coleridge agreed to choose the supernatural and Wordsworth the ordinary. Accordingly, Coleridge wrote The Ancient Mariner, and Wordsworth wrote many of his poems for the Lyrical Ballads. However, serious differences developed between the two on important questions. Coleridge did not agree with many parts of the preface. He objected to them as he considered them not correct. Erroneous means not correct. Some of Wordsworth's statements appear to contradict other parts of the same preface and the author's own practice in the greater number of the poems themselves. ये कोट अनकोट है. Some of the Wordsworth statement appear to contradict quote other parts of the same preface and author's own practice on the greater number of the poems themselves. Unquote. One such question was the difference between the language of poetry and that of prose. Wordsworth thought that there was no essential difference between the two. Coleridge thought they were different. He argued that meter is essential for poetry, which implies passion. Now we are on S.T. Coleridge, जिनकी लाइफ स्पैन जो है वो 1772 से लेके 1832 तक रही है. Now, just wait. S.T. Coleridge was a man of many parts: poet, philosopher, journalist, preacher, lecturer, playwright, literary critic, and literary theorist. He pioneered a movement. He started a movement against the mechanistic philosophy of the 18th century. More than the other romantics, he recognized the supremacy of imagination as the creative power. Biographia Literaria, जो कि 1817 में पब्लिश हुई थी, is a seminal work dealing with his philosophy of poetry and critical statement of romantic ideas. It is in this book that he explains how he had dealt with the supernatural in his poetry. He attempted to give a semblance of a quote. A semblance of truth sufficient to procure for the shadows of imagination that willing suspension of disbelief for the moment which constitutes poetic faith. Unquote. Now, Coleridge tries to differentiate between the two key terms, fancy and imagination, in the same book. He called imagination the shaping and modifying power. ये ना जो फैंसी और इमेजिनेशन है, मैंने तो कई वीडियो देखे, मतलब मुझे जहाँ से समझ आया वो है दाना टास्कर, कुछ ऐसे करके वीडियो है. उनसे आप उस वीडियो में आप देखना फैंसी और इमेजिनेशन का डिफरेंस जो है वो उसमें पता चलेगा. He called imagination the shaping and modifying power, fancy, the aggregative and associative power. The former means imagination. The former struggles to idealize and unify and to unify, while the latter is only a mode of memory emancipated from the order of time and space. To illustrate his point, Coleridge said that Milton had a highly imaginative mind, whereas Cowley had a fanciful one. Imagination itself is of two kinds, primary and secondary. Primary imagination, in Coleridge's view, is the organ of common परसेप्शन थ्रू द सेंसेस, मतलब वो आम आदमी में होती है. सेकेंडरी इमेजिनेशन इज पोएटिक विजन, वो पोइट्स में होती है. द लेटर वन इज द फैकल्टी दैट द पोइट आइडियली एक्सरसाइजेस. सेकेंडरी इमेजिनेशन है ना. फैंसी सीम्स टू correspond with the 18th century notion of wit in poetry, the faculty that enables the poet to put together metaphors and similes. Coleridge criticizes the mechanical sort of apparatus in poetry, exemplified by the fancy which the imagination transcends. The use of the secondary imagination is a mystical operation. The secondary imagination mediates between man and nature and indicates the organic unity of the universe. Coleridge's discussion of Wordsworth's faults and merit is a balanced presentation. His criticism of Shakespeare and other Elizabethan playwrights is of great value. He attempted to find the essence of Shakespeare's ideas to discover the laws that a great work of art creates within itself. He attempted to find the essence of Shakespeare's ideas to discover the laws that a great work of art creates within itself. He explained the nature of poetic expression and sought to answer the question, what is poetry? Now, what is poetry? His views on criticism are particularly significant as he was also an accomplished poet. Coleridge is remembered for three poems: The Ancient Mariner, Kubla Khan and Christabel. All three have the stamp of originality. All of them arise from the world of dreams, the subconscious. The Ancient Mariner is a ballad with memorable images and phrases. Kubla Khan is a vision poem seen in an opium dream. Christabel is a poetic fragment which evokes the medieval atmosphere through the suggestion. Now, as a literary theorist and as a poet, Coleridge made original contributions and his influence in these two areas is permanent. Chalo, thank you so much. Please subscribe my channel. Next video mein we are going to do the second generation of romantic poets. Thank you.